So given that substitutes exist for everything, and we can actually break this out, right? We know that thinking in terms of cost and benefit is helpful. So let's think about, I don't know why I usually want to put benefit on the left and cost on the right. There's no reason why that has to be true, but that's the way my brain is working at present. So we think about thinking in these terms is really helpful. So we could, this is again a really practical application of the tools of point number 3. If we want less of a behavior, what do we need to do? Right? So say what we have right now is we have too much traffic. Well, what are we going to need to do? We're going to have to, what would be the policy that most jumps out at you? Usually the first thing that people say is, well, if traffic's bad, we need to build more roads. We need to widen the roads. Oh, possibly a good idea. Well, let's think. First of all, if we want less of a behavior, what are we going to need to do? As we've already said, we're going to either need to reduce the benefit holding the cost constant. We're going to need to hold the benefit constant while increasing the cost, or we're going to need to do some combination of the two. Now, from a policy point of view, we may not have control over the benefit of driving. Right? What's the benefit of driving? It's getting to where you want to go in a convenient fashion. Policy space, we don't have a lot of control over that. So if we think about, we'll come back to this. Well, here, we may as well finish this out. If we want to increase a behavior, we need to increase the benefit while holding the cost constant. We need to decrease the cost while holding the benefit constant, or some combination of the two. Now, again, this is relevant for public policy, but it's also really relevant for your personal lives. So this would be why it would make sense to write thank you notes to people. You know, when I was a kid, my relatives would send me gifts for Christmas, and then my parents would make me write thank you notes. And I'd say, oh, that's a pain. Now, the reason my parents wanted me to write thank you notes, I'm sure, was to inculcate a sense of gratitude in me. But it actually would have made sense for me to want to write thank you notes too, because if we look at this, what does that do? Writing thank you notes. Do I have any control over the cost of those gifts? The time, energy, and resources that went into acquiring them and shipping them to me? No. But what a thank you note does is increase the benefit. Thus, arguably, if everything else stays constant, would it mean I get more gifts? I get better gifts? You see this all over in your life once you start looking. Start thinking in this fashion, and this is actually one of the powerful ways to do this. So, if we think about the benefit of driving, is that you get to your destination in your own vehicle, right, etc. I mean, we're really talking here. We could compare this with Ubering, etc., but that's not going to really reduce traffic very much. So you get to your destination. What's the cost? Well, the cost is, everybody says, oh, it's the gas, it's your insurance, although your insurance is more of a cost of owning the car rather than a cost of driving the car, but we'll come back to that when we talk more about cost. The big cost here of driving is how long it takes you to get there, and frustration and hassle of dealing with other drivers, right? So if we think about the policy of building more roads or widening roads, it doesn't affect the benefit. The question is, does it increase the cost? Well, no. It means it will now take less time and less frustration to get to where you're going. So actually, building more roads is going to be, it's not going to be up here, is it? It's going to be we are reducing the cost, and what we would expect to happen is an increase in the quantity of driving. And that's actually what we see. When I was living in Northern Virginia, going to graduate school there outside of Washington, D.C., I think the interstate going into Washington, D.C. was 6 lanes. Was it 6 lanes in each? I think it was 4 lanes in each direction, and they were thinking about widening it to 6 lanes in every direction. And between 6 in the morning and 9 in the morning, The eastbound, the portion going into Washington, D.C., was a parking lot. Stop and go traffic. You'd see people eating their cereal in the car, doing their makeup, reading a newspaper, right? Why? Well, was that always 4 lanes in each direction? No. No, no, no. Historically, it was like what we have here, maybe 2 lanes in each direction. It must have been 6, and they were thinking of widening it to 8 because it was stupidly wide. But what did they do? They said, oh, we have too much traffic. What we need to do is build more roads, which, as we've just talked about, reduced the cost of driving, which caused more people to drive. So if we really wanted to get to reduce traffic in Washington, D.C., what could we do? Well, London and a couple other cities actually have had to face this because London, a historic city with historic buildings, with closely packed areas downtown, really they couldn't do much about their roads. And the traffic was so terrible. Well, what'd they do? They started charging a toll to drive into the city. Yeah. And when they did that, guess what happened? That would be a case where they had no control over the benefit. They increased the cost, and guess what? People found substitutes. Took a little while. Turns out there was a greater ability to find substitutes the longer the policy was enacted. Initially, there probably wasn't a huge change. Some people who were just going in for amusement, decided to do something else. But within a month, you get ride sharing, you get more people taking public transportation. In the longer term, right, people start telecommuting, like what we've all been doing in 2020 here. People might get a different job outside of the city, or the jobs might move out of the city, or people might move into the city, because it turns out if you live in the city, you don't have to pay the toll to drive in the city. But the key here is that this actually, thinking in this fashion, had an important result. And this is the same thing for the price of gasoline, by the way. This is why we're never going to run out of oil. This is a contentious statement, but I'll make it again. We are never going to run out of oil. Why not? Well, because there are substitutes for oil. And as the cost of gasoline goes up, and as the cost of plastics go up, and as the cost of petroleum distillates go up, people will shift to substitutes. You think about if I had the last barrel of oil on planet Earth, what would I do with it? What would be the highest valued use? Well, if you're in the Mad Max world, you'd refine it into gas and you go for one last rip-roaring ride in a car. That's not what I'd do. I'd stick it in a room and charge people to come see this thing that used to power all of our vehicles, right? That's what I would do. That's why we're never going to run out of oil. Now, eventually we will stop using oil for, maybe, I mean, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see. We may stop using oil to power our vehicles. I mean, some people already have electric vehicles or hybrids. Be interesting to see how long, if in my lifetime or in your lifetime, we do away with, or we stop using cars altogether, internal combustion engine cars, right? I'm a little suspicious about that because awfully nice to be able to just fill up your car. Maybe there's no charging points, et cetera, but I don't know. But I do know we're never going to run out of oil. And 100, 200 years in the future, if the species is still around, 300 years in the future, we probably will no longer use internal combustion engines. So now you can go tell everybody that we're never going to run out of oil. Now that by the way, if that seems hyperbolic, it actually isn't. I mean, you go back 200 years, people were concerned about coal, about running out of coal. Well, what are we going to do when we run out of coal? Well, what happened? We're actually not anywhere near running out of coal. There's whole coal mines that are shutting down because it doesn't make sense to haul it out of the ground, because we have shifted to substitutes. So, thinking in this fashion, this is the beginnings of the economic way of thinking in terms of costs and benefits, thinking about whether a policy will actually achieve what it intends to, or what it is stated to do. Now, next up is going to be to talk about not demand generally, but the determinants of demand.